Hey, and what is going on, everybody? It is Zero here, back with more Diablo action. We're on the PTR again, guys. Today we're going to talk about another Rolands build. We're going to talk about the Shield Bash deal. So I wanted to see if Shield Bash could be a contender, because we now know the Lightning Sweeper is going to be pretty badass. It's going to be a contender. It's going to be able to push pretty high in the Griffs. And it's really fun to play Lightning Sweeper, or any sweep attack build. It's really fun to play that. So Rolands, as a set, does not just buff sweep attack, it also buffs Shield Bash. All the exact same stuff in terms of buffs coming from the 6-piece set of Rolands for Shield Bash compared to sweep attack. So you would think that, there's a good chance that Shield Bash could also be viable come Season 10. And that's the question. Is Shield Bash a viable option for running with Crusader in Season 10? And sadly, it's kind of a double-edged sword here. The answer is no, but also yes. So, we know that people can push 80s. Currently on live servers, people have done 80s with a Rolands Shield Bash. So here's the thing about Rolands Shield Bash, is that it's a little bit buggy. And it feels like it's still a little bit buggy on PTR. I'm not sure if they've made steps to fix it or not. I haven't, read into it deeply. Just playing it and feeling it out myself. Now the thing about Shield Bash is it's pretty gratifying to play 70 and lower. So the clip I'll show you is a 70. It's pretty gratifying to play. It doesn't really have very many issues. It does have some survivability issues, even just at 70. So that's the real kicker about it, I find, is that it's really like, once you decide, okay, I've done 70, I want to push further than 70 with Rolands Shield Bash, it gets extremely difficult to push. Like even 75s, you're gonna get like 72, 73, you're gonna get one-shotted by a lot of things. The build itself has a really hard time dealing with any ground effects. There's certain elite affixes that it has an extremely difficult time dealing with, like Illusionist is one of them. Arcane Enchant is another one. Arcane is something that a lot of builds have trouble dealing with because it's so powerful, but this build in particular really struggles against it because it just doesn't have the ability to really sustain itself easily. And that's an issue. Additionally, I find that it still feels buggy. So you'll see in a lot of Shield Bash builds with Rolands that we use the, check out this Primal Ancient, this Pyro Morella crafted shield. This is a shield you make at the blacksmith. Reduce the wrath cost of Shield Bash by 50%. So Shield Bash is a very expensive skill to cast. So we need this in the build. You really need it. And this is one of the issues, is the wrath cost issue of Shield Bash, and why it's really hard to sustain yourself, because you have to find a way to reduce the resource costs as much as you can. And if you're trying to reduce resource costs, you can use this shield, but then you have to make the decision for your personal preference. Do I need to roll more resource cost reduction on the rest of my gear, or do I do the other thing that I desperately need with this build and roll cooldown reduction, because you desperately need cooldown reduction in this build. There's a bunch of different ways to run the build, which is something I like. There's a bunch of different variants in how to set up the gear. And I've tried probably 5 different variants on PTR of gear setups. So don't look at this video as a guide on how do I run Rolands Shield Bash. This isn't that. What I'm talking about is it viable? Is there a viable way to run it? Is it something that you're going to be able to push with next season? And I personally feel that no, it is not. I think that it's something that is still fun to play, even though it can be very clunky at times. And that's actually one of the other bigger downfalls of the build, is its clunkiness. And by clunkiness, I mean that it has very little mobility. Very little mobility. It's one of the least mobile builds in the entire game, which is an issue. So it kind of sucks, because I like the skill shield bash a lot. I like the idea of just running up to a mob and being like, hey, boom, you know, smash him with my shield in the face. I think it's cool, but it doesn't have the damage output once you get past 70. And I've tried at least 5 different variants of running this in terms of gear setup, gem setup, skill setup, and once you pass 70, getting your damage, and like I said, people have done 80s on it as far as I know on live servers. It's extraordinarily difficult to have the damage output to be able to get through the Greater Rift within the time limit. And that both comes down to the amount of damage you're outputting and your survivability. And I think one of the reasons that the damage output suffers so much is because of the bug that exists with shield glare. What we do with this build, guys, is that we use in the cube or on slot, we use Flail of the Ascendant. Your shield glare deals damage equal up to your last 5 shield bash casts. Okay, and if you look at shield glare, you look at the tooltip, enemies, light erupts from your shield bash, blinding enemies up to 30 yards in front of you, enemies with health lower than, there's a bunch of different, a lot of people use zealous glare to get it back, but it is what it is. The most of your damage is going to come from shield bash, because for whatever reason, you'll see sometimes you'll use shield glare and it'll just destroy everything. It'll just fucking wipe it out, right? And then other times you hit it and it like does 0 damage, and you don't understand why that is. And no matter how many times you do it, like you'll wait on the rotation for Convention of Elements to get it just right. You'll have all your buffs up and you'll pound it and you'll wipe everything out. And the very next time you do it under the exact same circumstances, it'll do like no damage. And I don't know, maybe that's just my experience, but it kind of sucks. It's a fun build to play, but let's face the facts. Next season, when it comes to Rolands, people are going to be running sweep attack, probably lightning rune, and that's okay, but I feel like, why is shield bash so considerably worse? It sucks, because the single target damage of shield bash is really, really strong, but when you get into a group situation, it really, really falls apart badly, and that's because it's extremely difficult to lock onto your target with shield bash. You want to be hitting those elites as quickly as possible to put them down as quickly as possible, because the single target damage is so good. But half the time, if there's too many trash mobs around, you can't even target the elite, and that's just because of just the way that shield bash works. Like just even the animation itself kind of clunks it up and makes it really hard to do what you want to do. It sucks. It's unfortunate. It's a very cool skill, and there's a lot of ways to build your build around it. Like there's all sorts of variants. You can put Flail of the Ascendant in your onslaught. You can use Heart Slaughter with other things going on in the cube. You can use Final Witness in the cube. Unfortunately, the one thing that always remains the same is that you have to use this crafted shield no matter what. I feel like this crafted shield really messes up the build. That's how I really, really feel, is that this shield, having to have this, is what really messes up the build. And I feel like, it would make more sense to have this legendary affix combined with either the Flail of the Ascended or the Final Witness, or something like another legendary, probably the Flail of the Ascendant. Like it feels like it would make more sense if these two affixes were on one item. And you might say, oh, that's OP or whatever, but I mean, that's just how I feel. I feel like this shield is having to use it and you have to use it because Shield Bash is so expensive. I feel like I'm rambling now, but you have to use it because it's just so expensive to cast Shield Bash. So I mean, it is what it is. Are you going to be running Shield Bash next season? You might up to level like Griff 70, but if you want to push, it's not going to happen, and it's unfortunate, and feels a little odd that, you know, considering it gets the same buffs out of the Rolands set, that it performs so considerably worse than Sweep Attack. So that's what it is, guys. That's my thoughts on that. I had hoped that I would find a way to really make it viable for 80s easily. Not to say that it can't do 80s. It can do 80s. We know it can do 80s, but it requires a ridiculous amount of tweaking of your gear to get just perfect rolls. And then on top of that, more than most builds, it's going to require just the right RNG for your map and your mobs in your griffs, because there's a lot of stuff that this build has extreme difficulties dealing with. And you know, like if you walk into a grift and all the mobs on the floor have like Illusionist and Arcane Enchant, you are fucked. You may as well just exit game and start over again, because it ain't gonna happen. So that's that. Is Roland's Shield Bash viable for Season 10? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. I think that Shield Bash as a main damage dealer needs to be re-looked at by Blizzard. And I think that, based on my personal experience in PTR so far, that Shield Glare is still wonky and not working properly. That's my personal take on it with the time that I've spent with it on PTR. I may be wrong. I might be right. I don't know. That's just from playing it and the feel that I get from it and the numbers that I'm seeing. So take what you will from that. Hopefully you guys are having a good day. Like, comment, and subscribe. Later.